Ah, the land that is wet. Wetlands! That's what we're going to talk about today. Wetlands. There's a lot of life that lives in a wetland habitat or an estuary. So, there's a lot for us to explore. So, let's get right to it. We have Jen helping control all the fun pictures behind us here. She's not moving the camera. That was just great timing on our part. We also have Sarah over on question control. So if you have questions that you would like answered about wetlands, the animals, all the fun things that we're talking about today, go ahead and text us at 562-286-1838. And we also have an email line that you can email us to also. So if you're not watching live or if you want more explanations about your questions about wetlands, go ahead and email us at live@lbaop.org. So, what is there to really learn about this space? It looks pretty blah. Not a lot of stuff going on right now. That's just because this is one video that we have. There's a lot of life teeming in an estuary. So this is where the land and the water meet, but not always like a beach or a rocky coast. It's a specific area where the ocean or the rivers are joining together. Some places where it's a marshy or kind of swampy looking. It doesn't even have to be near an ocean. The wetland spaces where I grew up were just a few of the areas where the rivers and creeks would get slow enough that it created a kind of wet space around there. And we could get fun things like cattails growing there. This is not where I grew up. But there's a lot of space like this all across the United States. The United States has a huge coastal environment. But the wetland spaces kind of got a bad reputation for being smelly and gross, and they call them swamps and bogs, and that's ew. Well, they're not that, well, okay, they are kind of ew, but that's the fun part about biology. Biology's got a lot of gross parts. This has a lot of gross parts, but it's an important thing. So what are the important factors of a wetland? Let's see, just by observing this space here, if we can figure out why this might be so important. What is important about all of this plant life and these shallow, slow-moving waters? Can you see it? It's like right there. I'm just kidding. We're zoomed out too far. There's a lot of birds. There's a lot of fish. There's a lot of animals that live in just this space. Or they migrate and they stop in a space like this. Or they're babies and they're born in a space like this. So they're really important habitats for a lot of animals. But how many? Too many to count. Actually, somebody counted, but I don't know the number. But there's a lot of things that we can see here. So in the space between river out to the main ocean, at least coastally here, we could count up to 80 species of birds or more. Depends on how good at birding you are. I am not good at birding, so I won't get to the number of 80. But there's a lot of birds that would live between a land-based habitat where the river's still technically the river, the mouth of the river turns into an estuary, and it flows into the ocean. 80 species of birds just in this local Long Beach zone could be in that area. And that's just the birds. There's a lot of fish and invertebrates and plankton, and then they have a very complex space to be in because this is not just fresh water. This could be brackish or even just slightly salty. Sometimes tidal flow can backflow some salty water into the wetlands or up the river a little bit. Just depends how close to the river mouth you are. So these organisms have to survive some pretty interesting changes in their daily schedule. Now here on the west coast of the United States, we get 2 high tides and 2 low tides per day. If you're watching from our east coast, the east coast only gets 1 high tide and 1 low tide per day. So your wetlands will even look different than ours because of the tidal flow might change some of the species that live there, some of the animals that are used to being there. But we have a lot of similar factors. Let's take a look at some of these birds that are hanging out right here. What are the birds doing? What kind of body parts do you see? What adaptations or abilities to survive can you see in this area? So a lot of them, when they're feeding, they're doing like this sewing machine pecking motion into the ground. There we go. There's one of them doing it. They have these long, skinny legs. What's the good part about having long, skinny legs? It's not to reach up high because they're birds. They can fly. So they can walk around in the water without getting their whole bodies wet. So a lot of the wetland birds that are in the water or feeding from the water edge, we're going to have a little bit longer legs. There's other birds that have really thick, stout legs, and that's because they can kick stuff over and try to help find food that's hiding underneath stuff. The length and shape of their beaks is also going to tell you a lot about that bird. So I have a couple examples right here. This one and this one. Do you recognize either of these? This one's not really a shorebird. This one's out in the ocean, but it does kind of hang out in areas like this sometimes. Not typically for feeding. This is from a pelican. This is a plastic model of a pelican's head and beak. Now this one is a shorebird, and I've seen right here in Wetlands by Long Beach. This one's from a blue heron. What are some similarities between these? Well, they both have some length to their beak. So also kind of skinny. Here's a heron right here. They both dive for prey. I've seen both of them dive into the water to get to their food. But there's some big differences about the kinds of food they get and even the shape of their beak. So a pelican has a skin pouch underneath theirs that attaches so that they can grab their food out of the water. They'll probably get a mouthful of water and try to spit as much of that out as they can and swallow their prey. Whereas a heron doesn't really have that. You can actually see on our heron right here, its neck is even curled back into its body. But when they dive into the water to get their food, this sort of plunge diving activity, their kind of arm is crooked back, and as soon as they get to the water, their neck straightens straight out, and the aerodynamics of this beak allow them to get into the water at high speeds. Plunge diving is how they will dive to get deeper into the water to catch food, rather than surface dive, just splashing like a pelican does, getting food from usually the top couple feet. Whereas if you have these long, skinny beaks and the ability to dive at least a little bit, you can get farther into the water to catch your prey. So a shorebird that has long, skinny legs, but also will be near the ocean, that can dive deeper into the water to get its food. Well, it's very different from one of these little birds right here. Now, I'm not positive. I think these might be dowagers. And dowagers have a very different beak. Now, this one, you can see, if you're looking really close at your screen, has kind of a straight beak. But it's really skinny and thin. So if you have a really skinny, thin beak, and you do this kind of sewing machine motion to get into the water or into the sand, you're digging your animals that you're eating out of that space. So that's part of how beaks will change what they eat, behaviors that they have. But there's also a lot of little fish and invertebrates that live in the space too. Now, I think we have a video of an underwater space in our shorebird habitat, which is one of my favorite habitats here to talk about because it's a very complex space. We have a lot of land and rocks and plants for the birds to be in, but also the water for the ducks to be in and for the fish to be in too. So I'll step out of the way. Let's take a look at our shorebird habitat. We even have machines that help with the wave motion. You can see the seagrasses blowing back and forth. So this way it feels really, really similar to the actual wetlands that some of these animals would be in. Have you found the sneaky animals hiding in the sand yet? No. All right, let's take another look. Where's something hiding in the sand in here? There's actually two of them. I just found, what? I'm up to three. You're like, what? No way, James. I can't see three animals in there that are hiding in the sand. Well, they're really good at it. Here's the closest one. Those are two little eyes. Get out of the way. There we go. Those are two little eyes right there from a flatfish hiding in the water. So we're going to start it over again so you can watch a little bit more. Now look right here. This one's not even hiding that much in the sand. Get out of the way. All right, there we go. There's the little eyes. Now this one right here is actually out of the sand enough. You can actually see that the flatfish has its mouth right there. Now there's another one that was right behind me right here. So flatfish are pretty common in a wetland habitat. They hide in the sand. They're ambush predators. They wait for the food to get too close, and then they'll suck it in. Here's one not really buried in the sand. Very fishy. What is something that you might know about flatfish? Have you heard anything about flounder or halibut or even tonguefish, really? they have some really special adaptations. Right here on their head, both of their eyes are on the same side of their head. So ours are on either side, left or right. Well, on a flatfish, they're both on one side of the head. Because if you had to lay in the sand all day like this, if you had one eye in the sand, it's kind of useless. So both eyes are on the top section of the body, or what becomes the top section, because as they grow up, when flatfish are young, fish babies are called fry. So fish fry, they're swimming upright like normal fish, and then both eyes, one eye's on either side of the head, and then as they turn to their side, see, these have already started migrating their eyeball to one half. Another cool adaptation is at this age, they're see-through. They haven't developed any coloring yet, any pigmentation. So at this point, I think both eyes have actually made it all the way to one side of the head, and it stays forever on that one side. They're not even going to really swim upright anymore. So if you remember from Finding Nemo, when the flatfish got up and chased the kids around, while that's a fun part of the movie, that's not how flatfish swim. If it wanted to get up and swim, instead of getting up and swimming, it stays on the side and just kind of swims halfway, like that. And they really don't swim very well because they want to wait and hide in the sand or the seafloor and wait for food to come to them. So not only do the flatfish live there and have to feed there, they'll lay their eggs there too. So it's an important habitat for the birds to feed from, the fish to have babies from, but you also get things like baby stingrays and sometimes baby sharks. Some of the wetlands near here, the Bolsa Chica wetlands, some of our volunteers that volunteer with the Aquarium of the Pacific have been there and have seen young leopard sharks, which is pretty cool. Now, bat rays do have babies near the wetlands or in the wetlands, and those babies are going to be smaller, so they want to stay in a protected space. So back in the marshes, the wetlands, they'll be in there, and they can feed on the small crustaceans that are living in the floor and the sand, and then the adults are out in the ocean space. And since these wetlands connect to the ocean, once those babies get big enough, they can swim on their way right out. The little sharks, kind of the same thing. The sharks might lay their eggs inside a wetland. And then the juveniles, the kids, hang out there until they're big enough, they can survive out in the big ocean. So there's a lot of animals that use it as a space to have babies, a space to stop and have nests with eggs. But in other cases, it's a feeding stop as birds migrate north-south from sections of northern parts of the United States and Canada into, in some cases, even to the southern hemisphere, depending on the species of bird. So a lot of animals really rely on this space as a home. Here's a video of a lot of birds. I don't even know what all these birds are. Told you, I'm not that good at birding. I know they're white birds, so that's good. There's a lot of white birds. Gulls, terns. There's lots of species of gulls and terns. And sometimes it's very tough to tell them apart. Egrets. These, that might be an egret, but it's not a snowy egret. There are some egrets with parts of their body that are not white. So we have examples of some of these kinds of birds here at the aquarium too. Now they were not all rescues, but some of them were rescues. And that's kind of the fun thing, is that we have a space that some of these animals that can't go back to their natural space have a place that they can survive and be very well treated here and be fed the best thing they can get. There's no predators. People check on them all the day. So it's kind of like having spa day every day. Man, it seems like a really good life. Let's check out some pictures of some of our shorebirds that live here. Jen's finding some fun ones that we can look at. And we'll talk a little bit about the birds, and then we'll get back into some of the other things about wetlands too. Because birds are fun. Now this is a kind of a really cool video of one of our avocets. Now, because it's tough for us to film the animals inside their habitat, we have to film from the outside of their habitat sometimes. But this is their habitat, and oh! What just went around over there? Did you see that? Wait, there it is again. There's babies! Even our birds are so happy that they have babies here. I think I'm mentioning the way of some of the babies. There they are! Little babies! So our avocets have had babies here, and those babies will grow up. They might go to another facility if we don't have enough space for all of them, because we want to make sure that our avocets are happy and healthy, and those babies are happy and healthy too. So if there's another zoo or aquarium that would like avocets, we can send them some of the avocets that we have. We can also do other things so that the avocets don't really have eggs, and that's okay. We do some of that with all other species here at the aquarium, like our otters, our sea otters. We don't let have babies here because we want space for more animals that might need to be rescued rather than have lots of babies in here. And so in some cases, the birds just don't ever have babies, or the other animals just don't have babies here. Now we also have some really cool ducks that live at the aquarium. We have two species. There are the Bufflehead Ducks and the ruddy ducks. There's a number of ducks that live in the wetlands. You might have only heard of the mallard duck that has the green head and kind of grayish-brown body. Well, there's a ton of species of ducks, and they have some pretty interesting adaptations on their own. Now, the ruddy duck and bufflehead, this one's a bufflehead. They look like a duck. But the funny thing is, saying walk like a duck, quack like a duck, that's a duck. Well, they don't really quack. They do make noise, but they don't really quack. And they don't really walk like a duck either. So that saying doesn't really work, but they're ducks. Their legs are so far back in the body. So a regular duck, like a mallard duck that you think of, might have legs in the middle here. On these birds, it's back almost to the very back of their body. And so what happens is the legs are just in the back so they can kick and swim, but they're really not great for walking. When you see a bufflehead duck or a ruddy duck walking on land, it almost looks like they're not actually very healthy, that something's wrong with their legs. But it's mostly because they're just too front heavy. They would tip over as they walk. So it's tougher for them to walk around. They do walk around, but they're much better at swimming and flying than they are at walking. And the cool thing is we have the male here, which has kind of this iridescent coloring around their head, and the female right behind it has kind of the white flare on the sides of its head. So in a lot of cases, birds, male and female, have different colorings. In other cases, birds have the same colors. It's not really an easy way to tell the difference between male and female. But the ducks, they kind of fit the rule of sexual dimorphism. Male and female look very different. So that's one type. We also have the ruddy duck. Now, the ruddy duck has a little bit different kind of color to it. It's very dark-bodied, but the male, during breeding season, gets a very bright blue duckbill. Yes, it has a bright blue duckbill. It seems like we would have faked it or changed the color of the picture, but no, this is how it normally works. Now, one of the cool things about our guests, our members here that regularly visit, they might recognize the male ruddy duck during mating season, but there's been a lot of times when it was out of mating season and the bill changed to kind of a dark brown, that they thought we got rid of him, that we must have moved him somewhere. This is what he looks like during breeding season. Nice, bright baby blue bill. And that's the signal to the females. They're like, I'm a great male duck. We should have kids. That's what colors and patterns and dances that the birds do to try and attract a mate really mean. Is I'm a strong, healthy example of my species, so we could have babies. But after breeding season's over, colors change a lot in a lot of different species of birds. For him, it's pretty much just his bill that changes color. But that is kind of the signal to other females that he can have babies. So the ducks are pretty interesting. The ducks have different colors. The avocets that we saw, that kind of coppery head that they have, will turn white. So during non-breeding season, their colors change too. Well, that's a lot of things that live there. Lots of species of fish. We have sharks, we have rays, we have crustaceans, we have clams, we have birds galore, grasses and seaweed. And what is the point of a wetland? Is it just wet land? Well, yes, but the other cool things about wetlands are that they help filter and protect the coastline. So the filtering process comes when the rivers are flowing downstream. A lot of the silt and dirt and other things that are not good to get down to the ocean that happen because as the river collects these things as it goes downstream, this will filter some of that out. So they do provide a little bit of a sponging effect to soak things up, especially during floods or storm surge. So if you are someone that lives in the Gulf of Mexico area or near Florida or knows somebody that lives down there, there's a lot of sponging up the water that these things do during a storm surge. So they filter, they protect from flooding effects, but they also protect from wave action. So if you've ever been to the beach or seen videos of the beach, the waves are crashing and crashing. Well, that sand actually kind of disappears after a while. The sand will get eroded away. Wetlands help protect those spaces. So if you imagine waves crashing against a cliffside eventually erode the rock away, and the rock will disappear over time. Well, wetlands, because it's a living thing, it can regrow. As long as it's healthy and as long as we allow it to do it, it'll grow back over time, and it can help protect from wave action from storms too. So that's three great things that it does. The fourth one, which is probably really important, is that it makes energy from sunlight. You're right, it's a plant. Yes. Were you thinking photosynthesis? I was thinking photosynthesis. Light energy turns into sugars in the plants, which is energy for them, and then The things that eat the plants eat that, they get energy. So it's part of that natural effect of a food web. But it's not just that it makes energy on its own using photosynthesis. Do you remember anything about photosynthesis? It's not just that like, oh, sunlight, I get energy. They soak up carbon dioxide. They combine the carbon dioxide with water in the presence of light, and they make sugars and oxygen. That's photosynthesis in a very simple chemical equation way. I think it's pretty complex if you want to get really into photosynthesis, but the important thing is that these plants are soaking up carbon dioxide. So something that you might have heard if you listen to anything about climate change is called carbon sequestration. Ooh, big science words. Carbon sequestration. That means they use carbon. They take it out of the atmosphere and they lock it up into something else. Mostly their bodies. So they use the carbon dioxide from the air, makes energy, builds up the plants. Their cell walls, the bodies of the plant, they are using that carbon. So with more plant life in the wetlands, where it's supposed to be, there's a lot of carbon that will get sucked up from the atmosphere and the water. Sad part about that is, in California alone, over 90% of our wetlands are gone. And that's not good. Remember, it's healthy for the environment. It filters, it protects from wave action, storm surge, flooding, and it makes oxygen. That's really good. All right, we had a really good question come in. What is your favorite part of a wetland? And this is from a huge wetland fan. It wasn't Jen. Jen loves wetlands. Sarah wrote the question down, so unless Jen texted it to her. All right, my favorite part. My favorite part is the diversity of life. Wetlands combine these two cool spaces, aquatic habitats and terrestrial habitats. And there's so much that can happen in the interactions between them. A lot of the cutesy animals that we think of are from wetlands. A lot of the fun videos of cartoons of animals, there's a basis in wetlands for them. There's a lot that's important. Now, I grew up in Colorado. It looks nothing like this. No. We have very small lakes. If compared to places out in the Midwest, they're considered puddles. But the smaller lakes will get migratory birds that migrate through there. So in Colorado, we'd see seagulls and pelicans in the middle of the United States. Seems kind of weird, but these migratory birds need a wetland to hang out in. Well, there's enough water in Colorado that they can do that. If we do something to build over these wetlands or take them away because they're smelly or gross, well, we're kind of taking away those habitats. So we can do things like habitat restoration. And a lot of places are doing that. They're putting the wetlands back, or they're changing spaces so that both people and the living things can cohabitate. That's important. If we learn how nature can stay nature, but we can be us too living here, we can create a sustainable future for both sides. So that's one of my favorite parts is there's a huge diversity of things here. Sometimes things are underwater. Sometimes you get sandbars or other like little bits of stuff growing out in the middle of the water. And it's actually incredibly diverse. And they're not just in like wet places like Florida or Louisiana. We have wetlands here in California. We have a semi-arid habitat. And Colorado is semi-arid too. So there's a lot of wetlands all over the United States. But we get the really nice, fun, big ones like this in areas that are closer to large bodies of water. They're extremely large lakes or the oceans. So wetlands are pretty cool for a lot of different reasons. But a lot of it is the diversity. And if you go on a wetland walk, find a nature trail that goes through the wetlands, you can see a lot of different stuff. Or if you go by helicopter like this one did, you can see a lot of cool stuff. You might need a really good zoom lens to see what's going on down on the ground, but there's a lot of life that lives within a wetland. It's not just the smelly gross stuff. That's just natural things breaking down over time and decaying. The plants do die over time and they have to decay, but that's how wetlands work. All right. I'm going to let Jen pick something else that we can talk about and look at, because Jen loves wetlands. She's an algae fanatic. Phycology is her game, but she has a lot of other favorite parts about wetlands. You might want to check back at some of the other things that she's talked about in her wetland programs here in our Aquarium Online Academy, because if you watch the same theme class over and over again, we talk about a few different things, and you might get some really cool stuff to talk to us about or ask us questions of. All right, so this is a wetland bird. Now, we talked a little bit about bird adaptations. Let's see if you can figure some of these out. What do you notice about the snowy egret? Don't Does it look like it lives in snow? So it's not called a snowy egret because of snow. Well, okay, it has a white body, which to a fish underwater may not really look like anything because it's bright up there, the sun's up there. That could be a way for it to hide. But one of the cool things about the snowy egret is check out its feet. It's got these bright yellow feet and dark legs. Why would a bird have different colored feet? Guess what? They use their feet as fishing lures. That's pretty cool. So they kind of wiggle their toes in the water, try to attract some feed or some food, get their toes in the sand, try to make it look like there's something there that a fish could eat. And when it comes near them, ow, I snatch it right up. That's a pretty interesting behavioral adaptation where they've learned how to use parts of their body to hunt and feed that other birds don't do. Remember what happens when they have a long, skinny beak? Gives you the ability to puncture into the water much quicker than if you have a different kind of beak. So it looks crunched up like that heron was, but they actually have a pretty long neck. This one is our bird Merlin the snowy egret. Now, he is a pretty interesting bird. He has his favorite sections of the shorebird habitat that he likes to be in, but he'll still do shorebird things and come sit at the edge of the water, play with his feet in the water. Even though there's not a fish that he's going to be able to catch, we feed them so that they aren't really trying to eat anything in the space with them. We feed them so often, but they still do the behaviors that those birds would do if they're in that habitat. Some of the other cool birds we have in there are white ibis. We have plovers. We have a dowager in there. And we have the avocets. Now, every once in a while, we put our black-necked stilts in that space, but we'll often move them to another area because when they want to have babies, I think it's the mother doesn't much like people, but the dad doesn't like other birds. So we have to find a space for them that makes it so that they can be happy and healthy and have their babies in there. Now, somebody asked, is there a wetland habitat near Ventura City or Ventura County? I bet if we look hard enough, we can find them. Remember, wetlands can be near rivers, lakes, and oceans. Jen's Googling what might be there, but a wetland doesn't have to be a huge, wide, expansive space. It can be a small space where the water is shallow and slow moving enough and it stays pretty wet in that area that you can get almost what looks like an oasis of things growing. So wetlands can be small spaces, but we often think of them as the very large wetland spaces. Though there's Ventura Harbor Ecological Reserve. So if you're curious about doing a wetlands walk, you want to go check out baby birds and all the fun animals that are in that area. These are the baby stilts. Ooh, Carpinteria Salt Marsh Nature Park. All right, so there's 2 spaces that you can go check out and learn a little bit more about your local wetlands. So here's the mama black-necked stilt. Fun fact about stilts, they have the longest leg to body size ratio, or second longest leg to body size ratio, of all birds. You want to know what the first one is? I'll give you a hint. It's not an ostrich. What's another bird that you might think that lives near water, stands in the water, feeds from the water, has really long legs? They have great costumes. Flamingos! Now, flamingos normally have a white color to their feathers, but the flamingos that eat lots of crustaceans in the water, that color, that pigment kind of comes out in their feathers, so that's where they turn pink from. All right, well, check out your local wetlands if you would like to. Ventura County has 2 that we listed. There's the Bolsa Chica wetlands. There's one right here over by the Aquarium Pacific in Long Beach. So there's local wetlands, not as expansive as they used to. So support your local wetlands, learn about them. You can also help by teaching other people about wetlands and all the cool things that these animals do and the importance of the wetland itself to our global planet. You know, it's important for these wetlands to be there. So keep learning, and if you're going to hang out with us at 2 o'clock, we're going to be doing our fish dissection. If you have more questions, you want further information, email us at live@lbaop.org, and we'll have our educators help answer some of those for you. All right, have a great rest of your Thursday. Jen gave me her speech jumbling words thing problem today. So, all right, my friends, we'll see you at 2 o'clock for the fish dissection. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday.